Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to speak to Cindy Kaplan. Cindy is a conscious parenting coach. She's also worked as a parent coach, a family therapist, and a yoga practitioner. Cindy is the mother of a daughter with cerebral palsy. The birth of her daughter tremendously shifted her way of parenting as well as how she shows up for her children. Today, we're going to speak to one of her expertise, which is collaborative problem solving. So tell us a little bit about collaborative problem solving.
Yeah, collaborative problem solving is both a perspective, a philosophy, and a methodology. In that, philosophically, it takes the stance that all children want to do well. All children want to be successful. And by successful, I mean feeling good and grounded in their selves versus something external. And understands all children to do well when they can, if they can, not when and if they want to. And that's a radical shift from the way that we have been taught to look at challenging behavior. It's really easy for parents to think, especially the more challenging the behavior is, we begin to think that our kids are manipulative, or they're out to get us, or we see them being able to do something one day, and so they're just not trying hard enough, is where we often fall. And if we look at the way that learning disabilities were looked at years ago, we used to talk about kids being lazy and not working hard enough. And what we know now is that the kids with learning challenges are the ones that are working harder than anyone else. And so it becomes about not lack of will when we see challenging behaviors, but lack of skill. And then collaborative problem solving offers a method of working with our kids in conversation where they're a part of the problem solving, but that in the act of having collaborative problem solving conversations, we're actually helping our kids learn the skills that they need.
So what are these skills that these children, so when we're talking about these children, we're talking about kids that have these, big outbursts, emotional meltdowns. Sometimes they can get aggressive, sometimes they can get very loud. So What kind of skills are these children lacking?
So there's a number of skills, but they fall into three categories. And the categories are they're around frustration tolerance, they're around flexible thinking, cognitive flexibility, and they're around problem solving. So if we look at a 2 or 3-year-old, they're not so great at frustration tolerance. They don't yet have the words to express their feelings and what they're going through. They're black and white thinkers. If I don't get that cupcake that's in the store right now, it's not going to be there, right? Or if I don't get that cupcake that's on the counter, it's just not going to be there if I don't have it right now. And they're not great problem solvers. So then what happens as kids get older, if they're lagging in skills, that they're still falling into some of those camps, and it will for each person, it will look a little different. They may be okay in frustration tolerance, but they may not be great problem solvers, or they may still be black and white thinkers. For many parents, many parents will talk about their kids being kids who either say this is the worst day of my life, or this is the best day of my life, and there's nothing in the middle. So when that's the way that they're looking at the world, it's hard to think creatively, and therefore it's hard to solve problems, and it's going to lead to a lot of frustration. So there's several different specific skills, but they have to do with those three things.
Right. And I guess, I mean, in some ways, all children are different, right, in how they develop and
absolutely,
what they develop and when, right? So everyone's
yes.
timeline is different. And in this particular case, it's just that it's simply that these kids are developing certain skills later, and perhaps they've developed other skills earlier. But unfortunately, these kids are often diagnosed with, some of them are diagnosed with ADHD, some of them are diagnosed with ODD, some of them are diagnosed, with all kinds of different things. And so it's important for parents to be aware that these kids actually have these skills, that once they learn these skills, that it can really help in changing that behavior, that it's not necessarily medication or a label that's going to help them.
Absolutely. And I think the other real benefit to looking at it from a skills point of view is that, the labels can be helpful when you're trying to receive services, right? We know that. Medication can sometimes be helpful, but we know that medication does not teach skills. And so medication may be helpful in some ways, but we still need to teach them skills. They still need to learn skills. And the labels, while they can be helpful in getting our kids services, it's so easy to get attached to that label. And when we get attached to that label, we may be presuming so many things about that child that may not be true and not helpful, because we can put them into this umbrella where if we are able to take a label and sort of set it off to the side, so take ADD, for example, right? So a kid's been given the diagnosis of ADHD or ADD. And if we put that off to the side and just look at things like, my child is a little impulsive, or my child has a hard time with this, and my child has a hard time with this, which is key in moving towards collaborative problem solving, then we're able to work with it. Where when we just say my child has ADHD, it's like we've kind of washed our hands and given up on anything to do. So therefore it's a problem. And if we just medicate it, we hope we can fix it. But I think there's a lot for how we see our children when we're looking at them through that label, a lot in terms of how we see ourselves as a parent, but also the way that we can actually work with them when we look at it as specific, when we look at it in terms of specific skills and how to work on those skills.
So tell us a little bit more how we can help these children improve some of these skills.
Sure. Well, so I always like to share the story of my own son when he was 5, who used to insist on eating breakfast in his pajamas on school mornings. And I was really torn, because there was a part of me that was saying, no big deal, like he should be able to eat breakfast in his pajamas. But what he didn't understand, and what was also really important for me, was that he get to school on time, that we were carpooling with another family. And so what would happen, of course, is the mornings were fine. And then those last 5 minutes, as we're trying to get out the door, we were still fighting about getting dressed, and he was wanting to find something to bring to school for sharing. But he didn't know what he wanted to bring to school, but that was the moment to start looking for something. And so from a morning that was going pretty well, would all of a sudden become total chaos. And all these thoughts were spinning through my mind, like, what's wrong with him? Why can't he get dressed on time? He knows we have to get out the door. And so in a moment where I approached him, not in that moment, but a quieter time, and sat down, and this is not a full out collaborative problem solving conversation I had, but I sat with him and I said, hey, we're having a hard time getting out the door in the morning. And I know you want to eat breakfast in your pajamas. And before I could say another word, he said, I have an idea, which is ideal, because with collaborative problem solving, once we get a few things out on the table, we want the problem solving to come from the kids. And And in doing so, we as the parents have to believe that our kids have these resources inside themselves to come up with ideas. And we can transfer that knowing to them, that they can begin to know that they have resources within themselves. So he said, I have an idea. And I said, great. I said, what's your idea? He said, well, if you bring my clothes into the kitchen in the morning, then I'll see them. And because every time you send me into my room to get dressed, I get distracted by my toys. And at that last word, it was like, I was just like, oh my gosh, like never in a million years was I thinking that when I told him to go in his room and get dressed, that he was not intentionally trying to be late to school. He was not out trying to get me. He was not trying to give me a hard time. He was having a hard time because he has a hard time focusing. And so when he'd go in his room to get dressed, he was distracted by his toys. So he said, how about you bring my clothes into the kitchen and I'll get dressed then. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds great. And I then added, if the clock looks like this, because he doesn't know what 7:15 looks like, if it's this time and you're not dressed yet, how about we pause, you put on your clothes, and then you can go back to finishing breakfast. And he said yes. So literally for that moment and with that issue, it was done. It was done. So when we're having a collaborative problem-solving conversation with our kid, there's several things that need to happen. We as parents have to learn how to look at what we see as the problem to be solved from a place of neutrality. And so using the words, my child is having a hard time, and that's getting out of the mindset of my child is giving me a hard time, and shifting from my child is being a problem to my child is having a problem, shifts our perspective immediately, right? Immediately, I think we can come to them with, from a place of compassion and understanding that what's happening is simply what's happening. So when we can state it, when we can understand it from a place of my child is having a hard time transitioning from playing toys to doing their homework. My child is having a hard time getting into the shower. My child is having a hard time brushing their teeth before going to bed, or my child is having a hard time when I need to leave the bedroom at night. So the more specific and detailed we get, using that my child is having a hard time makes the problem to be solved really different and much more easily workable. And from there, we have to get clear on why is that a problem? What's our concern? What is our concern about this? So when we have those things clear, and that's getting out of a place of fear, but more concern, that we sit down with our kid and we state what we're seeing without judgment. It means that we have to get clear on the judgment that we're putting with what's not happening or what's happening, and set that aside. Because we know as soon as we say something to our kids with judgment, whether it's through our words or through the energy that we bring to it, they're going to shut down. And we want this to be an engaging conversation. So in having a collaborative problem-solving conversation, our kids need to know that there's no threat to them. And what that may look like is assuring them over and over again, you're not in trouble. I really just want to understand. It seems like this is hard. It seems like you're having a hard time, or we're having a hard time together getting out the door in the morning. And then getting curious. And that's a huge piece of it. Asking our kids what's getting in the way? What's going on? What's up? What's up with that? What's going on? And once they really believe that they feel safe enough and that they're not going to get in trouble, then they may be able to offer some really valuable wisdom. And here's where we build empathy in the conversation of saying, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. So when you're upstairs getting dressed, or when you're in your room getting dressed, you get distracted. Yeah, I get that. That's really hard to get dressed when you're distracted by all your toys, right? Then there's a connection. Then we have a place to work. And if my concern is that we get out of the house on time, then I need to say, so how do you think we can make this work where you can still get dressed and we can get out the door on time? And then we put it back to them, saying, do you have any ideas of how we could make this work? And like my son was able to say, well, how about we bring my clothes into the kitchen so I'll see them? Like, I can tell you, I would have never come up with that in a million years. And the fact that he came up with it and I was willing to say, let's give that a try, boosts our kids' confidence, not only that they can solve problems, but that we as the parents, or we as the adults in their world, actually value what they have to say. So that was a lot. Hope that's
no, that was beautiful. Actually, there are a few points that you made that I love. First, you mentioned that you speak of the problem, not in the moment of the problem. So you do it at a different time. And then that when you're having the conversation, both people's concerns are included. Both
Absolutely.
people's sides are included, and that's part of that conversation towards finding out what are those ideas, what are those solutions going to look like. And then the third thing is the most beautiful piece, which is the child being empowered,
Yes.
feeling heard, feeling seen, which is really key, right, in terms of creating that bond and connection between parent and child. And so in many ways, all parents could apply this method with their children.
All parents of all children with all abilities, right? So as you and I know, even with nonverbal kids, there's ways to have collaborative problem-solving conversations, right? If they don't have the words, but have the cognitive ability to answer yes or no, we can ask the questions. Does it have anything to do with this? Might it be this? Where they can, if kids have a communication device, great. If they're able to raise their hand, great. If they're not able to do that, but we know them well enough to see a facial cue or a gesture that may suggest something, then we go with that. So there's, I don't have time to get into the minutiae or the details of how we can apply this to everybody, but the general framework of this conversation is so empowering. And what I love almost more than anything is that just the act of having this type of conversation does exactly what you were saying, but also works on these skills that we're working with, the frustration tolerance. If the kids don't have the words, then we can help deliver those words in this conversation. They learn how their actions have an impact on others. And we're problem solving, we're brainstorming, we're figuring things out, which is a skill that is so useful for them wherever they are.
Right.
And that just happens from having these conversations.
Of course.
And works on building the relationship between parent and child.
Exactly, right? Because of that actually beginning to see the other and listen to the other.
Yes.
and that non-judgment, right, is
Yes.
so important, that compassion and being present to each other and who we are individually, right? Not
Yes.
imposing on the child what we want them to do or be, or to be compliant, right?
Yes.
It's a whole different kind of approach.
Yes. Because in fact, if we're working with them on just trying to get them to be compliant, or if we believe that they're doing this because they want to, right? If we see the challenging behaviors, well, they don't want to do it otherwise, that we're actually harming the relationship.
Absolutely. And I mean, oftentimes those children feel so misunderstood.
Yes.
Right? And actually, in many ways, that makes the situation worse. So these children who have been misunderstood for so many years, well, the blow-ups just end up being bigger, and the frustrations end up being more intense, right? So parents often get lost because they don't understand what to do anymore, because they've been implementing all of these different, types of reward punishment type of approaches, which do not work with some children that are perhaps lagging some of those skills, frustration tolerance, problem solving, and being able to manage their feelings.
And they don't work because we're assuming that It's not happening because they don't want to. So if we offer them rewards, what we're trying to do then is make them want to, right? And that's not so effective. And as most parents know, the reward charts are great for a few days, but parents can't keep up with them, and they're not teaching skills.
No, they're not teaching skills, and they're actually teaching compliance. They're not teaching
Correct.
the child to be empowered.
Correct.
They're not teaching the child to value their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own voice, right?
Yes. You know, and I want to add that I also see engaging in this type of conversation with our kids, I think falls beautifully into self-care for parents. Because as our kids grow up and as we learn to have these types of conversations with them, parenting becomes so much easier when there's an issue, when there's a struggle, when there's something that our kids did that we want to help them figure out how to rectify or solve or repair. We are not the ones to fix it, right? So we can take the pressure off of ourselves and become curious and ask our kids, what do you think would be helpful? You know, what do you need to do? What do you feel, which for me as a parent, entering those problem areas with an open mind and a curiosity, trusting that along with my child, we can figure something out, but I want him to initiate that or her to initiate that and have their voice be addressed first, just makes parenting that much easier.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And, you know, in many ways, we're teaching our children to consider other people, all the while continuing to value themselves. I mean, what a beautiful lesson to bring into adulthood, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I had another question for you because, you know, some parents are going to listen to this and say, you know, but with my child, you know, this isn't going to work because my child, perhaps they're going to get too upset, or maybe they won't want to have the conversation, or, you know, maybe they won't offer ideas. So I think it's important maybe to talk to parents a little bit about, you know, how do we approach a situation? Maybe it'll take more time. Do you have any words about that?
Yes. So, well, it all sounds really easy and straightforward. There's just these, you know, there's the empathy step, there's the getting the concern on the table, finding out the kid's concern first, then putting our concern on the table, right? I mean, there's very specific ways in which this needs to be done to be successful, and then asking the kid first to brainstorm a solution, and then sort of having it be a litmus test, and does it address both concerns, and then, hey, we're willing to try it. Rarely does it happen in a 5-minute time window, right? So just if you have a kid who's going to be defensive or quiet and needs a lot of that, gets dysregulated. And we know as soon as we say to our kids, hey, I want to talk to you about something, it's going to dysregulate them. So know that. And it may take, maybe one day, all that happens is, hey, I noticed that you're having a hard time. That may be it, right? Just the parent putting it out there in a neutral way without judgment and asking the question, what's up with that? They may say, and very likely may say, I don't know. And so we can take that to mean a couple things. One, they're not feeling totally safe yet to put their opinions out there, their feelings out there. Or 3, maybe they don't know and they're going to need some guidance from you. So if they really offer nothing, that we can say as parents, you know what, that's okay. You don't need to answer now. Think about it. And when you're clear, when you have an idea, I'd love to know, because then we can maybe figure out a way to solve this together. And that may be such a shock to their system because they're just not used to hearing that. Let that just soak in, that their parent just pointed out something that perhaps has been something that was punished, or something that was delivered with shame, or whatever, even with the intention not being so, but that's just what happens when we get triggered. That may be enough for a day, for the kid to just hear, whoa, that sounded different. And how do I know that if I say my concern, that that's going to be held in a safe space? So sometimes that may be enough. Another may be that we then say to our kids, can I ask some questions, right? I know sometimes this conversation is not a conversation we've had before, and I want to try it because it feels much better to me, right? It's okay to be transparent. And then to say, I wonder if, and put things out there and let the kids say yes or no. And when they do, and you have the concern on the table, you repeat it and say, okay, so your concern is this. And there are also some issues and problems to be solved that actually aren't concerns for the kids. So sometimes the word concern can be off-putting, but the kid can still hear our concern. So then our concern is on the table. And then when we say, do you have any ideas? The kid will be like, I don't know. And then what happens sometimes is if we say an idea before we give the kid a chance to say something, what can backfire is that the kid will be like, okay, so great. So you let me express my concern, but now you're going to go ahead and put your own, solution out there. So what's the point? So there's a lot of little details that you have to kind of get right. And it takes practice. So kids will often say, I don't know. So there's a lot of that reassuring that they're not in trouble. I think we have to give ourselves time to come back to it. Maybe that first part is all you get to, and you come back the next day where you begin to problem solve. And you let it take time because it's an adjustment for both the parent and for the kid.
Yeah, no, and simply opening that door and asking them to voice their concerns, even if they don't have an idea, you're already beginning to create that safe space. So even if there is no solution right away, you're building that connection, you're building that trust,
Yes.
You're building
Yes.
that safety for that child to be vulnerable and open up, right?
Yep. Yes. So it could come 2 days later, right? If you as the parent haven't said anything about that issue for 2 days, but you've left it as, let me know if you have any ideas because I'm curious. You could either check in with them, hey, have you thought about it at all or not? Or just let that percolate within your child. And maybe 2 days later, they may come back and say, hey, I think I know what might be getting in my way, right? Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important for parents to do, especially when you're trying this out, is to start with something that is not huge, deep, and dark, right? So they like to say, start with some low-hanging fruit.
Right. Because there are, sometimes we can have a whole list of challenges or things that we'd like to work on, but some things we kind of leave to do later, right? Because I do believe the collaborative problem-solving method has these 3 categories. There's
yes.
that, right?
Plan
and
A,
one of them.
Yes, sorry. So there's plan A, there's plan B, and plan C. So I can just say them real quickly. Plan A is asserting our will, right? That's what mainstream parenting is. That's what many of us do when we say do it or else. Or if you don't do that, I'm taking the iPad away for a week. That's asserting our will. And I will say the only times that plan A is really valuable is in a safety situation, right? If your kid's running out in the street, you're not going to say, I noticed that, right? You're going to run out and grab them, right? That's imposing your will and is necessary to do. Plan B is really what I've been talking about here, having these collaborative problem-solving conversations in moments where the heat is not on. There's also something that is an emergency plan B, but I won't go into that now. The other is what they call plan C, and that's where you may take a problem that you would love to see solved, but because it may be a little higher intensity at the moment, you're going to drop it, not forever, but for now. Don't take one of the really, really, heavy hitter issues and try that when you're just becoming, when you're just adapting to working this way with your kid. So start with the simple and just choosing. I think it also, in putting things in categories like a plan A, plan B, or plan C, is that I think as parents, we can also get overwhelmed when there's so many things that are triggering us and so many things that we want to work on with our kids to solve, but that, the challenging behavior happens when we have expectations that are here and our kids' skills are here. So we can not drop the expectations, but we can lower the expectations so that our kids can be successful. And then we can work on the skills. And when they have those skills, we can begin to, to raise some of those expectations. But talking about expectations is a whole nother thing. But that's when we see challenging behavior. So I think when we can farm some things out to, yeah, this is something that is challenging, but let's table it for now. Like, let's work on getting our kids to brush their teeth before they go to bed, and drop sitting at the table for a half an hour, or finishing all the food on their plate, or getting A's in school, or whatever it may be, right? Like dropping some so that you can begin to have a framework that becomes more comfortable, so that you can tackle them later.
Right. It's like using the smaller challenges as opportunities to build that safety, vulnerability,
Yes.
connection, empathy,
Yes.
compassion, to build all of that, so that in those moments where those bigger things need to be addressed, that foundation, as you're saying, is present.
Yeah. Yeah. For a kid to say, okay, I get it. So actually my parents are curious, and and my parents aren't out to get me. Right? I mean, it's the same skill set, right? And as we're working on this too, we all fall into the same categories, right? Some of us are less skilled in frustration tolerance. Some of us are less skilled in problem solving. So this is also helpful for us to engage with our kids this way.
And speaking of parents, I think it's important for us to mention, the energy, and you mentioned this early in the conversation, the energy that the parent brings in, because we could say all the right words, but if our energy is not one of non-judgment, if we're not coming in with that energy of compassion, unconditional love, where we really see the child, that child's going to feel that.
100%. So even if we're saying you're safe, you're not in trouble, the kid's thinking, right? So, and this has come up. I mean, one question is, when you are coming at solving a problem, another reason to choose perhaps a low-hanging fruit is that until you can become really clear on what your concern is versus the fear, and when our concerns are clear, most likely they're going to fall in the category of either safety, health, or education. And so before coming to this table of conversation, you've got to do your own work as a parent so that you can present it from a place of neutrality. You can present it without the lens of, without the shaming energy. So yes, the way that we say it is as important, if not more so, than the words we use to convey the message. And so before having this type of conversation, we as the parents have to get clear. And I think that's where having this language of my child is having a hard time, and getting really specific. Like, does your child have a hard time brushing their teeth before bed every night? Or just on Tuesdays and Thursdays after they've come back from camp, right? Or just on Mondays and Wednesdays after they've had hockey practice? So the more specific we are, the more helpful it is for us to see it as neutral, and easier to then put out to be solved.
Well, thank you so much for all of this amazing information that I think parents are going to find so valuable. I wondered if there were any last words of wisdom and insight that you wanted to share before we close the interview today.
I just think the most important thing to keep in mind, and that this accomplishes, is understanding that our kids want to do well, right? So when they aren't doing well, something's getting in their way. And it's our job as parents or teachers or the adults in their lives to figure out what is getting in the way, because that's what we can work on to build and to solve, and not just to fix the problem. And I, there's nothing more valuable, I think, than to getting curious with our kids and finding a way to work with them that deepens our relationship and fosters a connection. than to, to come at it from these, very two different stances, as you're the parent and need to listen to me.
Yeah.
And I think, that, as I said, it's a way of taking care of ourselves as parents as well. I see it's a fabulous way of finding calm within the chaos. To solve problems with our kids without being wired and triggered and reactive.
That's right, because it takes so much work on our part to get to that place of total stillness in those moments so that we can hold space for our kids.
Yes.
Right? So we can really be present to them and allow them to feel what they're feeling, which is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was so wonderful. And I'm going to put your information under this video in case anybody has questions or is interested in learning more about this work. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Christine.